So, you've travelled across Sanctuary, fought back tides of Hellspawn, brought low fearsome evils, and halted Lilith's fiendish plan right in its tracks. It's a slightly safer place than it was a few days ago, and while it no longer teeters on the precipice of disaster, there's still a lot of evil running amok. As the Wanderer, you've prevented countless deaths, run errands for druids and desert refugees, and made a pretty penny along the way. And now you might be wondering, what's next? Both for my strapping young adventurer and Diablo 4 as a game. First off, let's talk about what's in the game at this very moment. I'm going to refer to everything after the events of the campaign as the endgame. You've got an early endgame when you take your first steps into World Tier 3, and a late endgame when you're heavy into the upper eidolons of Torment difficulty. All of this is a whole new state of the world that's expected to keep you busy for much longer than the campaign ever could. So if you've come here having just finished off the story and thought you were almost done with the game, don't fret, you've barely even gotten started. But before we dive into what this late phase of the game entails, just a heads up. If you've already been slogging through World Tier 3 and 4 for a while now, you already know a lot of the information I'm about to talk about, so I won't take it personally if you want to skip ahead to the next section. While you're rooting around down there though, why not give us a little subscribe click on the way. Cheers for that. Alright, for the rest of you, let's talk endgame. The first step on your path to true power will be to unlock World Tier 3, Nightmare. This is simple enough once you're done with the campaign. Finish off the epilogue quests, go to Kyovashad, and at the very top of the town you'll find the capstone dungeon, the Cathedral of Light. It's locked to level 50, so if you're a few levels lower, I'd recommend holding off for a bit, or being ready to face a fair bit of pain. It's a touch harder than the other dungeons you'll have encountered, but it's nothing crazy. A lightning resistance elixir will go a long way here, and once that's been conquered, you're ready to go to the next world tier. Go to the statue of Anarius just south of the dungeon, and use him to make everything a little more difficult. And just like that, your endgame journey begins. Open up your map, and you'll notice there's a whole load of new things going on. The first are grim favours of the Tree of Whispers. Unlocked through the epilogue, completing these objectives will grant you a chest that provides items, gold, and crafting materials. If you've played Diablo 3, these are essentially your Horadric caches. Now, these are the good first steps in getting some gear upgrades. You'll probably feel a little bit weaker moving up a world tier, but don't worry. At item level 65 is a breakpoint and stats jump up. These new sacred items will give you a nice power boost. Get a few of these and you'll be back to pummeling Hellspawn in no time at all. Once you've got a few new items, you can start looking at Helltides. These events turn a region of Sanctuary into an infernal state, and demons cross through the veil and run amok. But where there's demons, there's treasure. By conquering foes, completing events, and battling bosses, you'll acquire aberrant cinders. Turn these in at chests dotted around the map, and you'll receive resources and a high chance at a legendary or unique item. There's a lot of value in these events, but be warned, they only last an hour, and you will lose all cinders you don't spend at the end of the time. You'll also drop half your cinders if you're slain, so don't go too gung-ho. The next new addition in the world tier are Nightmare dungeons. If you've been doing your chores for the Tree of Whispers, you'll have picked up a few Nightmare seals found in the Consumables tab of your inventory. Well, these new challenges each have their own affixes, new modifiers to the instance that will give you and your enemies new effects. Finishing a Nightmare dungeon will award you upgrades to your Paragon board sigils, as well as the shot at a harder difficulty. But let's circle back and look at your new fancy Paragon board. This right here is your next step in character building, and will keep your power steadily growing through the endgame. You'll earn points regularly, as well as additional special stones you can slot in to provide even greater bonuses. Leveling up these sigils in Nightmare dungeons will allow you to hone your build with some hefty buffs. So gear, experience, and passive character upgrades are what's on offer in Nightmare dungeons, and they're certainly worth it. You can even bring your friends along if you fancy the company. So there, Helltides, Grim Favours, Nightmare dungeons. Those are your new activities. There's still other events like world bosses and gathering legions from the previous world tier, and those are definitely worth doing if you come across them. This gameplay loop will continue until about level 70, when you unlock Torment difficulty, and then you just keep on going. Other than that, I'll end this section with a few words of advice. Upgrading your gear gets more expensive, so keep a healthy supply of gold. You'll also need a ton of crafting materials, some of which only come from Helltide events. So once you've got that gold safety net, salvage, salvage, salvage. Legendaries will become a lot more common in this world tier, so unless something has an aspect you really want to hold on to, or is a high roll that's worth extracting, don't feel bad about salvaging them. You'll need the parts. And that about sums up the current endgame in Diablo 4. And if you're joining us after skipping forward a bit in the video, welcome back and thanks for subscribing. The next thing I'm going to be talking about is something on the near horizon: seasons. For those of you who aren't familiar with the concept of seasons in ARPGs, here's how it goes down. Every few months or so, the game enters a new state. There are new challenges, rewards, mechanics, and in the case of Diablo 4, a new battle pass. Old characters cannot earn these rewards. In their stead, you'll have to make a new Wanderer and take to Sanctuary once more. The best way to get an idea of what's in store is to take a look at what Blizzard was doing in Diablo 3. Every season has a theme, and that theme invokes some new mechanic. For instance, Season 14 was the Season of Greed. You got double the number of treasure goblins. Season 15 was the Boon of the Haradrim, which doubled all rewards from Adventure Mode caches. In other cases, these seasonal changes push us to try and find a new way to play. Season 19's theme was the Eternal Conflict. Players were rewarded for amassing huge kill streaks, which gave powerful effects when earned. Maybe they'd make corpses rain from the sky, damaging enemies, or maybe they'd release a wave of explosive honing chickens. This little change encouraged people to build around fast kill times with big AoE skills to rack up these impressive streaks. So these themes and mechanics give each season a feel, but they also offer a multitude of rewards. There are several challenges to tackle, rewarding cosmetic items exclusive to the season, as well as powerful sets that can define a build. Also, most seasons have introduced new items to the pool, powerful legendaries with interesting effects to shake up the game. While sets are absent from Diablo 4, we do know that they are planned. Whether we'll see them introduced in the first season or later down the line, we'll have to wait and see. Other than that, a new season in Diablo 4 will bring in a new rotation of Nightmare dungeons. Currently, only a small selection of Nightmare and Ancestral sigils can be dropped, and every few months those dungeons will change to provide a bit of variety. So we know for sure we're going to get these little tweaks to make the game feel fresh, but given the nature of Diablo 4, there is the possibility for Blizzard to take seasons a step further than they did with its predecessor. They could add in new quests to encounter within the world, fitting in the theme of the season. If a particular area is the central focus of the theme, they could also make some changes there. Change the landscape a little bit, akin to how they make Helltide events feel a little bit more infernal. In terms of character building, there's scope for introducing new Paragon paths, sigils, and item affixes to vary how we approach our kit, not to mention new monster and dungeon modifiers to add some extra danger. Given their focus on dynamic world events, it seems likely that they'll add more of those, and if we're lucky, maybe even a world boss or two. They've got a solid foundation, and seasons should help build on that and make the world feel even more fuller as each one passes. But that's not all there is to look forward to. Following the game's explosive release, Blizzard have confirmed that expansions are not just planned, but in production.
Well, as I sit here, we're about to launch the main game. We're finishing up Season 1. We're working on Season 2. We're working on Expansion 1. We're kicking off Expansion 2.
So Diablo 4 is Blizzard's fastest selling game of all time. They already have 2 expansions in development, and that's it. That's all we know. But there's nothing stopping us from using our heads a little and having a little think about what those expansions might be and how they'll change the game. Let's look back to Diablo 1. Its expansion was Hellfire. It introduced new areas, new mechanics and systems, and a new class, the Monk. Diablo 2 got Lord of Destruction, introducing yet more mechanics, items, a continuation of the story, and 2 classes, the Assassin and Druid. Diablo 3 had Reaper of Souls. In came the Crusader and a whole new endgame loop, not to mention a new story chapter and final boss. Every previous game's expansion added similar things: new classes, new systems, new item types, and in the case of Diablo 2 and Diablo 3, provided a continuation of the story with a new main antagonist. So for Diablo 4, it makes sense to assume that we'll receive something similar. But without spoiling anything for anyone who's found themselves here before finishing the game, the campaign ends with lots of questions left unanswered. Not to mention, it's a Diablo game without, Diablo. Aside from some story involvement, the primevals have been pretty absent. A few lines in the game tell us that they're regaining their power, which may well be setting up their involvement in future expansions. So where could these new adventures take us? An obvious choice would be the regions of Southern Estuar, the Marshlands, home to the ancient cities of Vizjun and Kurast, as well as a whole lot of jungle with man-eating plants. It proved to be a favourite stomping ground of Mephisto in Diablo 2, so if that primeval is going to cause trouble, it makes sense for him to return to his old haunt. This area is also where the witch doctors from Diablo 3 are canonically from, so venturing to this region could introduce them back into the mix. But there are even more options. Again, I'm going to be as vague as I can to avoid spoilers, but it might make sense for the continuation of the story to happen somewhere that can be reached by boat from somewhere in Estuar. 3 options spring to mind: the Skovos Isles, home of the Amazons; Jianzai, land of the wizards; and the Western Kingdoms. Now, this latter option may excite many Diablo fans. It includes loads of familiar locations and gives grounds to reintroduce a fan favourite class, the Paladin. Although, given the importance of Tristram and the West March and the likes, something tells me that they might be saving that for later in Diablo 4's lifecycle. Just as the Lord of Terror kicked off the franchise, so too may he close out this 4th installment. But those are just my guesses. If you have any gut feelings about where else we'll visit and what classes we'll play in the future years of Diablo 4, let me know in the comments. So, the talk of expansions is exciting, and while we can speculate, we shouldn't be too hasty. Reaper of Souls launched 2 years after Diablo 3, so we've still got a long way to go before we see a continuation of the Wanderer's story on Sanctuary. Until then though, we've got the immediate future of the game, the current endgame and the rotating season starting in July. From there we'll see consistent small content updates, gear additions, new features, perhaps even a quality of life improvement or two. Maybe we'll even get a bag to keep our gems in. Little touches and injections that should hopefully keep Diablo alive and kicking until expansions start rolling out and the biggest Diablo game to date enters the next phase.